Hi, welcome to the Scientist Sage Sangha. I'm Nancy Anderson Dolan from Wise Heart Wellness, and we join together every Tuesday night, if you're live, and discuss a word that impacts us in particular ways and see how we might be able to learn a little bit about it and upgrade our lives. So, tonight's word is boundaries. And I wasn't really sure I wanted to talk about this when it came up. But then when I started doing a little background on it, review of things I taught about it before, it was such a deep dive. I was late sending out the email because there was so much material to go through and size down to one little email to share with y'all. So tonight's going to be an interesting discussion. And it really starts with the idea of what boundaries are. And I loved one of the people that I've researched. They talked about a series of yes and no's, just simply a series of yes or no's. And it was stop signs that like literally we install so that we can have our own life and we can make our own choices and really be who we want to be and not be at the mercy of other people's energies and requests and manipulations even. So it's so important to think about this because we would think that we would just know it. Huh? And our bodies often do know it, but it's overridden by lots of things. It might be family things, it might be culture things, it can be experiences, it can be trauma, lots and lots of things. But if we don't come back and review those boundaries regularly, it it doesn't work because we live in changing times as well. And we go through so many changes of our own, and some good, some not so good. And we can work with being able to come back to our lives and how we want to live them and who we want to be by reviewing the boundaries. It's a great way to just give your life a checkup. So when you do develop boundaries, they help to literally define your identity. Like, who are you going to be in the world? And it's much easier to be very clear about what you say yes and no to if you have that sort of defined self. We'll talk a little more about that as we go on. So it also protects you from people who are intentionally trying to manipulate you or violate you. And if you have a clear boundary, you don't sit there and think, what is this person doing? You think, I don't allow that. And so it's really important to have those ideas already because it can be very challenging through, social etiquette, how I might behave if someone says something. And it could be as simple as a joke that I find offensive, or it could be as serious as somebody impinging on your physical being. And it gives you some order because there are a lot of demands in our world. And for things like time and efforts and money. And if I have some ideas of boundaries around those things, then it helps me make decisions. One of my boundaries is around time and time spent with friends. I want to spend time with friends. So when I somebody phones me and asks me if I want to do something, I usually say yes, because that's something I know I want. I don't get overly worried about, have I been out 5 times this week or not? Those boundaries are not as significant to me as spending time with people, especially after my last year of being at home with broken legs. This is boundaries a little more wide open than usual. But it also helps you protect yourself in terms of what you want to be doing in the world. Because sometimes we'll do things we don't really want to because we don't think we have other choices, or because we think those people really want me to do that. And I have this fear of missing out with them. So I'll do what they want, even though I don't really want to. But if I have a clear boundary that is like, no, I don't do that, then I know I take the time to do something about that and do something different. And it really gives you self-confirmation when you feel like you are managing your life. You're at the helm, and not just on a boat that's going wildly down a river all over the place. Life feels better. And so this is a not a not a small thing. It really can be something that helps you develop your life and the peace in your life. One of the quotes that I had in there was talking about how without personal boundaries, you get into a drill. You just do what you have to in front of you or what people are asking for you, and then you go to sleep and you eat and just basic responsibilities rather than have a more fulfilling, more open, more thoughtful life. And so it's really it, that's a big payback to have, and a lot to give up if we don't have those boundaries. They talked a lot. This was the one of the newer things that's coming out in the last 5 years, talking about defining your mission or your guiding values or principles or how you want your life to look and feel, how you want to be perceived, and what impact you wish to have in the world. Those ideas, if we really are a little clearer about them, then we can make different decisions about what we're going to do, what we're going to let in, and what we're going to keep out. Recently, a friend asked me if I'd like to work at a treatment center that she runs. And I, I'm thinking, okay, well, I see clients and stuff, and it's not financially as rewarding as the work I usually do day to day, but there really was not a lot of indecision about it because I'm very passionate about recovery. And so the opportunity to do that was really wonderful. And I took her up on it. So rather than have to, set a boundary like, no, I only do this kind of work because that's who I am and that's what I do. I have that ability to go, oh, I love recovery. I would love to do that work and be able to not be hemmed in by my own sort of imaginary boundary. So the other thing that has come up more in the last 5 years is about having both external boundaries and internal boundaries. And so internal boundaries are those ones I put in place to keep myself from taking advantage of myself. This may sound a little schizophrenic, but when you work it through, you'll agree. Because there are a lot of things that, things like, well, I'll talk about just a few examples of the kinds of boundaries we can create. Things like physical boundaries. One of the things that I can have trouble with is getting enough rest. And that's a boundary issue for me. I'm saying to myself, no, I'm not going to stay up past this time. I'm going to get up at this time in the morning. These are physical boundary issues, time boundaries that really help me pay attention. And um, the time of the time that I do not exercise is an issue. So the time that I save for just developing my core strength after my accident, then that is really a boundary that I set. Like, no, I get up every morning and I do that so I can recover from my accidents. So that's a boundary as well. The food we eat, the things that we have in our physical space to, enhance our lives. Those all are physical boundaries, internal kinds of ones. Of course, the external ones are that, nobody hits me. That's a boundary, solid, not going to happen. Those kinds of things are physical boundaries. Emotional boundaries are literally when you separate yourself from the emotions of others so that you don't involve yourself in trying to manipulate their emotions and you do not allow them to manipulate yours. And sometimes that's very hard, especially with people really close to us. But really knowing that boundary that, oh, I feel concerned for that person. But if I go down the rabbit hole with their distress, then I'm not going to do well because I'm not helping them and I am being harmed by that. So boundaries about how we deal with emotional things are really important as well, both those internal and external ones. And even the idea, one of the internal boundaries that I encourage people to have is that you meet your own emotions with compassion and assistance if necessary. So, just like I would for a friend, I would help them meet their emotions and I would help them find assistance if they needed it. That is a boundary I would set. I wouldn't try and manipulate their emotions for them, but I would assist them in dealing with them. And so, of course, I would do that for myself. Well, get the assistance that I need. Um, and one of the ones that came up is about spiritual boundaries. People are talking much more openly about feeling forced to take on a certain idea of spirituality. And there are so many unique and really diverse, spiritual or life energy beliefs. But unfortunately, there's not always a lot of respect for different beliefs. And that can be a boundary that we choose to set. We can say, no, no, I'm not of that faith tradition, or no, that's not the way I believe. Rather than just having someone literally at times come to your door and try and tell you how you should believe. So setting clear boundaries around those things really help us again about defining ourselves. When we don't attend to that, we can actually sort of wander into different things. That's very different than consciously making a choice about how I want to experience the world and what I might want to explore in the world. That's a different thing. And so to set those boundaries with ourselves too and get some clarity around those things is useful. And so that's some examples of kinds of boundaries. But before we talk exactly about setting some, I want to talk about some of the boundary barriers because probably the number one is that we get this idea or this feeling or maybe even feedback that it's unloving or mean to set boundaries. I had to set a boundary earlier today about something in my home, and it was very apparent that that person felt it was kind of unkind of me to set that boundary. But those are the kinds of boundaries that we can set with some grace and gentleness, but persistence. And so the idea that I think it's not okay to set a boundary can really, really caused me to be really unconscious about this kind of thing or reactive. Because if we don't have good boundaries, we live in reactivity, just about doing what the next person thinks we should or feels, I have an emotional reaction, like I think I should do that. We can just live in that constant reactivity. Boundaries help us not to do that. And then there's the idea that um, we're we don't we think that we're going to change somebody else's behavior instead of our own. And this is, a confusing thing. And a lot of boundaries are set up like, okay, I'm going to do this if you do that. And that's fine. But with the idea that if I say this to you, you won't do that anymore. And truly, that is not generally how it works out, especially on the first run of your new boundaries. And so I want to share with you a diagram about spheres of influence. Just let me set this up for you. Or try to. Okay, here we go. And this idea of spheres of influence, it really helps us see where I have control. Okay. Where I have control, I can make the choices. I can choose to say to someone, I am not going to stay with you in the car if you're going to drink and drive. I'm not going to loan you money because I need it for my purposes. Those kinds of things. I can really control those things. I can control how I spend my time. I can control those things. So then we move on to the realm of influence. Now, I can influence people by sort of inviting them into a different situation. I might say to them, well, I can't volunteer on Tuesdays, but I probably could do it on Thursdays. Or I don't have a lot of time to do this, but if you gave me a couple of weeks notice, then I could likely fit it in. I can do those kinds of things. I can behave in the way that I want to be treated. I can repeat my boundaries as I have set them. I can do all of those things, but I still don't control the other person and how they react. I only get to control me, what boundaries I set, and what consequences I work with. And so when we think about consequences, we think about the other person's consequences. I encourage people to think about the consequences to us if we don't follow through with our own boundaries, because things get out of control often quite quickly. And then the realm of concern, we can care about these things, but I can't necessarily change them. I might be able to do something about them, but I can't necessarily change them. So when I maybe a political party I like, I might work for them during an election, or if there is a water shortage, I might use less water. I'm just going to pause for a moment. Sorry for that little barking moment. I think we have that under control. So back to these ideas about understanding the difference between control, influence, and concern. And so when I set boundaries, I have to take that into mind. Because if I say, well, I'm going to leave if you don't stop that, if I have no way to leave, I don't have control of that. If I say that I am going to not do this anymore, if this continues, then I need to know what I'm controlling. Maybe I'm leaving a job or leaving a situation or a partner, different things, but really understand before I organize my boundaries, what I control, what I influence, and what I do not control, and work with the acceptance of those things I cannot control. Okay, so go back, stop share, there we go. And come back to, so this idea about it. The other thing is that not understanding the range of boundary strengths. So what that simply means is that we can have rigid boundaries, but sometimes those are problematic. A rigid boundary about nobody hits me is a good plan, but a rigid boundary about things that are that block, if I have too many boundaries in too many places about too many things, and they're very rigid, then it keeps people away from me and new experiences away from me, and it makes it smaller in my life. And so we have to think about that when we're setting boundaries too. Ideally, we're going to have some, not go to, away from rigid to nothing, because chaotic boundaries are often reactive and weak. So we don't have a boundary until something happens, and then something happens and we throw up the boundary. But it's often at that point, it's too late, it's reactive. We may not really know what the situation was caused by and have a boundary that isn't useless. It is useless to prevent it. And so it really, what we're looking for is having boundaries that are clear but flexible. So as we go along in life, I might have nobody talking in the car when I'm learning to drive, which is a great idea. But later on in life, when I can drive easily, I can have a conversation while I'm driving. And so there are boundaries that shift over time as well as we get more skilled and as we have different experiences in our lives. So having this idea of having boundaries that are clear but not rigid is really important as well. So there was an attachment on the email too with a great boundary belief assessment that was really interesting to fill out. But I warn people about making sure you are filling it out in the sense of how you actually act when you're when your boundaries are pressed in those situations, not how you think you should or you would like to, because there were some lovely differences there in that. So back to creating boundaries. And this part is really quite short because it's not that complicated. Once we, sort of have an idea who we want to be and that sort of thing, we can go forward. And I've really talked to people about being mindful of how you feel in your body because your body tells you about boundary infringement far better than your brain does. Your brain gets left behind sometimes when people are infringing on your boundaries. You're like, well, that person is saying this with a smile on their face. They're saying they're helping me. Maybe it's okay. And when our body is going, no, no, this is not okay. This is a problem. No. And we override that a lot of the time. And so we want to pay attention a lot to our bodies. Take their word for it, step away or create some space for us to come back. But we can also go in and see in places in our lives where we have become um, re- uh, repeatedly challenged and where we have felt uncomfortable. Situations we feel uncomfortable in that they can be anywhere, at work, at home, even with ourselves. We set boundaries and we keep breaking our own boundaries, all sorts of things like that. Then literally we narrow it down, and I encourage people, don't do a wholesale renovation of your boundaries because it really usually doesn't work. Because if we need a wholesale renovation, we need to learn a little more and practice a little more. But choosing the sentence literally in our heads or to another person is, if this happens, then I will do this. And so if someone is repeatedly talking to me and pressuring me to try and change my mind about something, I will step away from the conversation. I might say, I'm not willing to talk about this right now, or I have to go, or whatever. But if that happens, if that pressure situation happens, that's what I will do. And then I take it on the road and practice and see how easy it is to do in practice. And I might be saying that to a person if they are frequently trying to pressure me to do something. But most of the time, it's different people, different situations. And even with myself, if I'm like, oh, I really should go and do that, or I really shouldn't go and do that, like settle down, take a time out, and see really what comes up through my body. And does this fall in line with that design for my life that I've got? So going into that sort of thing, I've put in some examples in the email, just talking about, you know, uh, and this is one of my own. If I do not stop eating the whole bag of chips, then I will not buy them. If this happens, then I'll do this. Things like, if you come for a visit in May, you could stay with me for 5 days, setting a limit ahead of time. And I really like the idea of proactive boundaries, about putting that out forward when you are engaging in life. Like, I'm looking for a roommate that likes cats and doesn't smoke. Or, mom, now that you're going to live 3 hours away, I won't be able to visit so often. But I would like to come for a weekend once a month. So it really is a lot about expressing what you want and need. And then you can see what happens. Now, sometimes it's negotiable and sometimes it's not. And to be able to say, well, no, I can't do that, whatever they might have suggested, but I'll think about it. And withdrawing in the heat of the moment, working with boundaries, is often a necessity so that we can back up, re-clarify what we want in a particular situation, check in with our body. What message did we get from our body? Are our body saying, no, that doesn't feel right to me. That feels like I'm being taken advantage of, or it doesn't feel safe, or, it doesn't feel like the right time to be doing this. So we'll get lots of information if we take the time to pay attention. So I really encourage people to, work through all sorts of boundaries, practice a lot with these, because writing them down, rehearsing scenarios, I do a lot of that work with people in counseling, because they want to change a boundary with someone or around something, but they're afraid to. But just practicing and visualizing, it actually starts to take the fear out of it. We may have lots of reasons for having poor boundaries. There can be all sorts of things, like early trauma and brain chemistry imbalances and old experiences or cultural learning, all sorts of things, but everyone can break it down and build it up again into boundaries that enhance their lives. So that is it for today. But I'm not going to do a meditation today because this is a big topic to even think about meditating on. But I will encourage you to, take some time and do some quiet thinking about this as you work with this topic. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you're with me live, we'll start our discussion in a moment. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you. Have a good week.